As always, Albert's work is very compelling. It's very compelling, very clear-eyed, and concise. And the same with this paper. I must say, as a sociologist who have studied Chinese labor for some 20 years, this is like the first time I heard that things are changing for the better for Chinese labor, for Chinese workers. So it's a great paper, and I find many of the findings are very intriguing and interesting. And I think Albert shows very convincingly that workers in the past decade have experienced real wage increase. Market demand has outpaced supply of labor. And most interestingly, I think he also argues that even the Chinese government has a change of heart, that they have become serious in implementing the law. And informalization has been reversed, and workers are getting more protection. So once I finish reading the paper, I feel like all this is almost too good to be true. But I hope, of course, that you're right, whether we're talking about the long term or the short term. But in the meantime, I'd like to hear your views about several things that I think about after reading your paper. Of course, the most striking thing, and the thing that really intrigues everybody here, is your graph showing a decade-long increase in wages. And it kind of flies in the face of some of the things that we've heard last year, the Honda strike and the workers' suicides in Foxconn. And what those two episodes revealed, or seem to have revealed to us, is that wages were not increasing as much as workers wanted, and or at least wages were not increasing at the rate of the standard of living or price increase. So in that regard, I like to say a little bit more, and especially if you have data showing some breakdowns in the graph that shows a decade-long increase. Are there differences in terms of industries? Are there differences in terms of sectors of industries? If everybody's enjoying that kind of wage hike, why are we seeing so much discontent brewing, at least last year in South China? Also, if we find a breakdown of those wage hikes rates, we may be in a better position to sort of assess some of the hypotheses that you've been throwing out in the papers, which has to do with China's economic restructuring, whether low wage, kind of low value added, low profit kind of enterprises are indeed moving out of China into places like Vietnam and Africa, which you mentioned, or is that just in the horizon and hasn't really happened? So that's one thing I'd like to see more elaboration. The second thing is I wonder, I know you do a lot of labor studies and surveys, and I really feel like maybe one variable or one theme that you might want to add to those surveys is the effect of workers' protest. That is to include politics into the survey, because as we all know, or many people in this room would know, labor protests or strikes have happened a lot in the past 10 years, exactly the period where your graph show wage hike, but we have never had really empirical aggregate kind of indicators to examine that kind of relationship. On the ground, I've done a lot of ethnographic fieldwork, and in areas which are prone to strikes and collective action by workers, there indeed have been increases in wages. But I'd like to see a more national kind of picture coming out from survey. And another kind of politics that you might want to, and your colleagues might want to include in your survey, is government policies. At least last year, the figures that we've read in the newspapers is that there has been like a 22% increase in China's minimum wage nationwide, or the average of national figures. And so that, what role does government policy play in terms of trying to not just to exploit workers' labor power, but also their consumption power, and when did this policy take effect, or when did it actually happen? So these are the two kinds of politics that I'd like to see our more survey kind of colleagues would entertain in the future. Finally, the third point for Albert is, again, based on my own current research. I've seen in many cities land grabs going on in the fringes of cities. And that has produced and that has forced many people giving up, or they have no choice. They have to leave because land has been requisitioned by the local officials. And we've been seeing the supply of a new kind of workers from the countryside, not the voluntary migrants that have supplied workers to the cities, in the cities, but a new kind of migrant workers who are extremely vulnerable because they don't have the land that they can go back to. And it may not be a large number right now, but if land grabs continue in the ferocious way that it has continued, I wonder whether we can only count numbers of workers and whether we should consider the kind of structural situation or kind of, not just the number, but the quality of this kind of workers, that the vulnerability, and maybe they will have to force accept lower wages. So this is the countervailing trend that may happen, and according to my own little research, ethnographic research is happening, that will continue if the central government doesn't rein in on the local government's very pervasive and kind of aggressive land grab policies. Now let me turn to Professor Lee Hongbin. Very solid evidence showing what sociologists like to call the social reproduction of inequality. So it's fascinating. I really appreciate the kind of data that you managed to collect. I'd like to ask a few questions, or maybe one question, main question, about mechanism. When one of your graphs showed that female students actually scored higher overall than male, but everything you show later shows that women were not doing that well, they were not as likely to get into elite universities as boys. So I wonder how this happened. What were the mechanisms, or does it have to do with university admission policies? If you could, I know that sometimes survey data doesn't allow us to talk about mechanisms. We could only see the pattern, but not exactly the reason. But if you could give us some hunches, that would be great. My last question has nothing to do with the presentation. I hope you don't mind me asking. It has to do with something that I found myself very just puzzling. It has to do, it came out from, again, the two incidents last year, the Honda strikes and also the Foxconn suicide. And I've been reading some reports in these two, flagship enterprises in the South. And what the most striking thing is not that workers committed suicide. I've seen many of these in my 20 years of doing research in China, both in the Northeast and in the South. The most striking thing in both cases was that there has been this new and pervasive use of student interns as workers in these factories. And at Foxconn and Honda, the numbers that I've seen suggest that as many as 20 to 40% of frontline production workers on the assembly line are supplied to these factories from vocational schools directly. And they are required to do their internship for 1 to 2 years, getting very little wage and almost no protection or security in terms of employment. They had no choice. This is forced labor, bluntly. And I asked, is it legal? It's legal because there are local laws that allow, and it's something that's signed by the education department in these local governments, that these governments, local officials allow this kind of practice. And so you see this connection between education and factory and is set up in such a way that you have a big pool of casual, vulnerable labor that may not be captured by official statistics. I don't know how widespread this is, but it seems to me that if these two big companies use it as an institutionalized way of having access to cheap, young, vulnerable labor who can work for long hours, I suspect that it is more widespread than just Foxconn and Honda. So I just would like to see if you have any response to this or any more information about this. So thank you very much.